images to get the picture of what's happening. But thank you for being here and having that courage to come out in an evening when you could be doing anything else, but learning about something that's really very important to millions of people. This is a real photo of a real girl, my picture, of a little girl named Mina. In 2004, I was in India immunizing kids against polio with a group of people called Rotarians. They're international volunteer humanitarians. When we ended up at a center for children rescued from slavery. In 2004, who was talking about human trafficking? You couldn't go to the newspapers or onto the internet like we can now and see something nearly every day. NPR certainly hadn't done a program, a series like they did this past week. So you can imagine my absolute shock to look around me and see 50 children, former slaves. My world changed when I met an 11-year-old girl who had been enslaved in the circus. She performed an act called the Star Kiss, grasped a rope in her teeth and twirling higher and higher toward the top of a tent without a safety net below. Had she fallen, she would have been discarded. I learned later that she had been sold for sex at 11 years old. She was the same age as my daughter back home in the U.S. And looking into her face, I realized that by the grace of God, was my child, my sister, you, or me. We live in an amazing country where there is a lot of privilege. And one of those privileges is that many of us are not vulnerable to traffickers. I cried for about 10 hours after meeting Mina, and when I woke up, I realized I could do one of three things. I could just forget that I had ever heard this. I could just bury this deep. I could let the problem overwhelm me. That's really not a choice. I have things to do. There was only one other option left, and that was to take action. So I learned everything I could when I got back. I began volunteering at a local center for female survivors of human trafficking. I began working on projects overseas in India and other places. And eventually, realizing that I needed help, I couldn't do this by myself. The rest of the world needed to know. I began talking, also wrote a book, but mostly talking to people like you and other people, as John said, who cannot get away from me fast enough. When I first began speaking right here in the U.S., inevitably someone would come up. Now, I had just been talking about working with local survivors of human trafficking. Someone would say, when you say human trafficking is here, you don't really mean here, do you? And I would say, yes, it's here. They would say, we know it's in India, Africa, former Soviet states, but you don't really mean here. Yes, I meant it was here. In 2014, I was in beautiful Nepal, was working on some projects for survivors of sex trafficking there, and I ended up speaking to a group of local businessmen, and yes, it was a group of businessmen. One took me back to the guest house where I was staying, and on the way back, anyone been to a developing nation, particularly India or Nepal? Can I just see some hands? Okay, so the traffic is not like we have here with a beautiful median strip in the middle, and we all know which direction we're supposed to be going in, and we all, unless we're passing or whatever, for the most part, we stay in our lanes. This was a situation where it was probably about the space of maybe 2 to 3 lanes of a highway and about 6 lanes of traffic, and it didn't matter which way you went. It was sort of weaving in and out, and there were trucks and people and motorcycles. And as he was driving. He turns around to me, and yes, I'll do it the different direction. He turns around to me and says, "So, Carol, when you said human trafficking is here, you didn't really mean here, did you? Here in Kathmandu?" He said, "We know." It's like, keep your eyes on the road, please. "We know it's a problem in the U.S. and the West. But you don't mean it's a problem here in Kathmandu, do you?" And I said, "Yes, it's a problem here." It was only at that moment that I really understood that it doesn't matter where you are. We hate to believe that our beautiful, beautiful community is harboring slaves. It's harboring slaves. It's illegal in every nation of the world, but it exists in every nation of the world, and no matter where, here is human trafficking, modern slavery exists here. This is a map, a global map of world slavery as of 2014. The darker the color, I'll see if I can point out some of these, India, Nepal, certain countries in Africa. The darker, the more vivid the color, greater number of slaves there are. You notice that the U.S. It's actually still yellow. We're not white. We are not free of slaves. We may have fewer, but it's here too. In fact, this is a map of Pennsylvania, and these dark blotches, the more vivid the color again, the greater the number of cases of human trafficking. This is actually from 2013. They stopped making these maps because traffickers were getting wise to us. They were looking to see where were these cases, where had people found these individuals who were being trafficked or enslaved, and they were finding them again. They don't want them to, they don't want testifying against them. Maybe they want them back. So they stopped making these maps, but you'll get the picture. In 2015, last year, there were 106 cases, 75% sex trafficking, 14% labor trafficking. So here's my question to you. Where are we on this map? Can you see it? Okay. It is Philadelphia. Notice we're not completely without, though. Does it surprise everyone that we are inches from being a hot spot of human trafficking right here in Delaware County? Are you guys surprised at that? No? You're familiar with cases here? Okay. Oh, very little bit, yeah. I was shocked to find out just how many cases of human trafficking we have right here, or how many cases we have here that end up coming, in a sense, from Philadelphia. When I say cases coming from, that's where the case was called in to the human trafficking hotline. But how fluid these cases are. So what can you tell me about the patterns of where these hotspots are? What do you see?
Well, I can't see that, but I'm just wondering,
okay.
Are they near a major, like I-95, or, I would just think that would be some, major...
Yes, indeed, you are correct. This is the East-West Pennsylvania Turnpike, and that's the North-South Pennsylvania Turnpike. Pennsylvania is a state that is a destination, transit, pass-through state, and source for victims of human trafficking. I think we could do better than that. So let's bring it really local. Anyone from Chester County, which is really not very far from here. Okay, Chester County. If you've gone to Westchester, there's this really little cafe called Three Little Pigs. One day, I took a group of survivors during their day off. This cafe closed so that survivors could have their anonymity, their privacy, eating lunch, and we all went to lunch. one a day. I was standing at the window with one of the survivors, and she says, "Wow, Westchester has changed." And I said, "Why, yes, it has. There's a new hotel there, lots of different shops." I said, "How do you know Westchester?" She said, "I went to high school here." Her husband sold her to pay for his drug habit. That is a case of sex trafficking, obviously. We also have labor trafficking, and again, this comes from a Chester County case, but understand that quite often, remember the pass-through situation I talked about? It's very fluid. You keep people who are victims of human trafficking on the move from one county to another. They can't cry out for help because they don't develop relationships that are trusting. In this particular case, 24 men from Latin America sold everything they owned, their homes, all their belongings, in order to buy transportation and a visa to come to southeastern Pennsylvania to work in the landscaping business. When they got here, they worked for a while, receiving a small amount of payment. Landscaping, for those most of you know, is not a particularly lucrative field for many, but it paid. And they were able to send home money to families. Some of their families ended up joining them for a little while. When it was time for the visas to be renewed, the company that they had come up with offered to renew visas. Has anyone here ever seen the paperwork for renewing a visa? It's about 25 pages of I thought, legalese. Now, I have a master's degree. I speak English fairly well, short of perfect, though, I'll add. I looked at that and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. These guys were from Latin America, and Spanish was their primary language. Not some of them, their only language. Furthermore, one of them was deaf. So he was really going to have problems when it came to learning the language and filling out this form that was distinctly written for lawyers to understand. So the company said, "We will renew those visas for $600 each." That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money for someone who is making perhaps a minimum wage mowing lawns. But they said yes, it was worth it to have those jobs, something of the possibility of a better life for their family. They handed over $600 each, and they handed over their visas, their documentation. After a while, the paychecks stopped coming. They went back to the company and they said, "Where's our pay?" They said, "You're not getting it." They said, "You pay, we are here legally, you owe us some money, we have worked." And they said, "Well, actually, we'll have you deported. You start getting more pay, any pay, we'll have you deported." They said, "You're here legally with documentation." They said, "Really? Are your visas renewed?" They stole their visas, stole their money, and did not renew them. So now you've got a situation where they really are here without documentation. Everything has been stolen. They stopped paying men. And then the beatings began. They said, "Fine, beat us. We're not working till you pay us." Here was the real clincher, and I want you to put yourself into the position of the man. They threatened to throw the wives into a brothel if the men didn't work. Which one of you would not have worked to save the person you loved? What's even worse is, to show that they meant business, they put one of the wives into a brothel. The men worked. They moved them up and down the coast to another state where someone, one of them, was able to get away, ask for help, and they were indeed rescued. When this went to court, at that point, this was 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't have a law in Pennsylvania, a comprehensive anti-human trafficking law that had a definition of human trafficking, because they thought that we had covered it during the Civil War. Pennsylvania did not have a law against human trafficking. We've corrected that now. That law became effective in 2014, fall of 2014. Can you imagine? It didn't help them. So they got the company owner and some of the employees on visa fraud and other related charges. What these companies, what the workers could do was they could take a civil suit. There was a legal definition, and they could sue. They won their court case. They were indeed human trafficked, and they deserved and would have gotten restitution. But the company owner, before he was sentenced for his crimes in the criminal court, gave away his money, hid his money, and then he took his own life. Yes, these workers were free, but were they really treated with justice? Was there really justice in the end? I don't know. I think, again, we can do better. These are court cases. How many of you are from Delaware County? The bulk of you. These are a couple of recent cases, media reports from here. They're hard to see, so let me just sort of summarize these. It's taking young women, deceiving them, selling them for sex. We'll talk a little bit more about how this works. So how did this work, and what is human trafficking? There's a really long legal definition, and what it boils down to is this. Modern slavery, in which someone is working against their own will because of force, fraud, or coercion. It's typically divided into labor or sex trafficking. There are other forms, whether it's organ harvesting, forced child marriage, or any child marriage, really. All sorts of other things. But typically it's sex and labor. Sometimes, as you heard with the case of the workers from Latin America, they combine the two, where someone may be forced to either work during the day and then sold for sex at night, or their families are held through this particular way. What does it really mean to be a victim, and how do you end up that way? So, over the years, as I've worked with survivors of human trafficking, simply as a volunteer, I've asked them, what is it like? Or they'll tell me. You don't tend to ask too many questions. For one woman, it means for 10 years she didn't go to the grocery store. Raise your hand if you like going to the grocery store. It's okay, not so bad. It begins to look better when you hear that Anne Marie, she does let me use her name, didn't go to the grocery store for 10 years. But she didn't know where or when her next meal was coming from. Like to pay mortgage or rent? It's a privilege. When you realize that Anne Marie lived in an abandoned building for quite a bit of that time. She never had to pay rent, but she also didn't have heat, electricity, or hot water. And she called her building, the abandoned building where she lived, her abandonminium, because it just made it sound a little nicer. So many of the young women that I work with and on behalf of now came at this because they did not have two parents to protect them. Maybe one was in prison, maybe one was dead, maybe one had alcoholic rages, maybe one was on drugs, and while they were there, they weren't really there, they weren't really parenting. So many of them do end up in abandoned buildings. Many of them are relying on themselves or friends to raise them and to launch them. So maybe they end up at a party with a friend. And that party ends up at a hotel where a man in a room just next where a big party is going on. Everyone is sure they're all having a good time. And they take a 14-year-old girl, two traffickers, otherwise called pimps, and force her at gunpoint to choose. Which one will she work for? This is how you end up, because you are vulnerable. You do not have society behind you. You are faceless, voiceless, nameless, and friendless. This is another real photo. This is mine. This is in an area called Kensington. It's an area in Philadelphia, neighborhood known as the place to purchase heroin and sex. The day I actually go down there, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. The day I was there and took this photo, I was walking down the street with a social worker, and when we approached this young lady, she was standing up against the wall, stock still, not moving. There had been a man who was talking with her. He ended up, when he saw us coming, he hid around the corner that you don't see on this photo. I really began to understand the psychological bonds of sex trafficking. No more shackles. What does it really mean to have Stockholm Syndrome and to really do whatever a trafficker says out of fear or threat? When I thought, why doesn't she move? Why doesn't she ask us for help? For heaven's sakes, we're standing right there. Here's the difference between psychological bondage of today, of sex trafficking and freedom. I had someone watching my back. I could have gone a million places. I could have asked a million people for help. She had none. So she stood there as though being held at gunpoint, not moving until we left. Had that man threatened her or us to where I could hear it, I could have called 911 in an instant. But he was very creative. He didn't. The social worker and I ended up, in a sense, having the upper hand, though. On the other side of that corner now is a drop-in center for current victims of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. They can drop in anytime they want, where they are given a meal. They can take a shower. There's food, clothing. There are exit strategies when there is enough trust that they say, I want out and I'm ready to make a change. I am ready to break free of those bonds, whether or not there's going to be risk to me. When they're ready, there's help for them now. What do you see? So let me tell you kind of what these are. These are mugshots of young women who were arrested for prostitution. First line is this girl over a period of time, as is the second line. This is girl number 2, as are all these photos, different mugshots over time. All of them arrests for prostitution. So often, people think that prostitutes do this because they're bad girls or they're on drugs or whatever the reason is. Okay? They just do that. Arrested for prostitution now. What do you see from here to here? Decline. Does she look like she's on drugs?
Not in the early ones.
They do look like high school photos, and they do not look like they're on drugs. What do you see about here? Okay, yeah, she's got a black eye, and she has a broken jaw. Okay, same with this one. Not so happy looking. But the farther along you go, look, the drug use. Many people think that they do this because of drugs. It's more often the other way around. Drugs are a way of holding someone and exploiting them. It's called a wake-up kit. where they get up in the morning and whatever their drug of choice is, the pimp or trafficker is there to provide that, whether it is pipe, crack cocaine, whether it's heroin and a needle. That is how they're being held, psychological bonds. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what length of time? Both of these are the same length of time, from picture 1 to picture whatever. Yes, got it right on the nose. 1 year. 1 year. Why can I show these mugshots? Because these girls are no longer alive. The law enforcement officer in Denver said he could not keep on working at this any longer without letting people know what's really happening out there. So he made these pictures available to show that this is not an equal transaction. It is not something where you are paying money and you're getting an equal transaction for an act of sex in return. This is what it really is. The average age of formal entry into prostitution is 13 years old. Can you be a child prostitute? Or can anyone be a child? The average age of entry. I've met him at 7 years old. Yeah. Here's the weird thing about this. This is Anne Marie, by the way, and she does let me use her picture. She is not quite as old as I am now, but close. She said, the hard thing to believe is how much your brain changes when you are controlled. You lose the ability to think your own thoughts and to dream your own dreams. She said, when you're controlled, when he says the sky is purple, you believe him. You know it's blue, but you believe it's purple. Anne Marie was trafficked for sex for 10 years and arrested dozens of times for prostitution before anyone said, could she be a victim instead of a criminal? And might she need recovery, rehabilitation, instead of reincarceration? Anne Marie had terrible, terrible things happen to her. Terrible. A lot of violence. At one point, she was pregnant with her pimps, her traffickers, actually twins. She was addicted to cocaine, and she said, there has to be a better life than this. I cannot bring my children into the world this way. And she tried to take her own life. She had been beaten when she told the trafficker that she was pregnant. So she was still bleeding, bruised, when she tried to slit her wrists. She had a change of heart, and she said she doesn't know exactly what happened. She got up, held onto her wrists, ran to the nearest emergency room, yelling, I am pregnant, and I need help. That is a very, very rare thing for a girl who's being exploited. But she began getting help. Eventually, not for a long time, but eventually, she found her way into a program that she was able to get the recovery, the medical, the psychological help she needed, everything else. She had a 3rd grade education. She's working on her GED. She's down to 1 unit. 1 unit. Get it? What can happen when people like you and me care enough to get involved? Her record is now expunged. She is now a peer counselor helping women out of the life that she once endured. And she has just gotten custody of her children, who are now 9 years old. That is a success story. She helps fight in Harrisburg for better laws, like the one that became effective in 2014. This is what happens when we help everybody. So how do we help? What do we do now? One of the first things we can do is we can change our mindset. Prostitution, no more. It is people, whether it's women, men, boys, children. They are people who are prostituted. They're not prostitutes. They are victims, not criminal. And by the way, I once spoke with a lot of the victims don't even know that they're victims. They're just really, they just have no idea. And I spoke to a woman who, Rachel Moran is her name. She's now written a book called Pay For. Wonderful book, very deep, very horrifying, but it's a wonderful book. Rachel said, I was 15 years old. My dad had committed suicide. My mother had mental health issues. I had 2 younger siblings, and we were below the radar of any kind of social services. She said, I had a choice one night. I could eat from a public trash can and sleep on a park bench. Or there was a man who just walked up to me and offered money for a sex act. She said, so I chose the sex act. She said, and now I live with the guilt that I chose prostitution. Folks, can you consent to sex with someone when you're 13 or 15 years old? No. Is it a choice? No. Choosing between whether or not you will survive and whether or not you will commit a sex act is not a choice. So, changing our mindsets is really one of the first steps. Know the signs and who to call. That's our next slide, but giving you the overview. For those of you who simply want something fun to do, a little more fun than some of the stuff we're talking about, there's a fundraiser every year. April 2nd it is this year. Please save your gently worn dresses and jewelry for me. I can sell them at a sale called Dress for a Good Cause, and people come buy them at their rock bottom prices. If you like to go shopping, save those for me. Every year we have a new project. This year it's going to help start a local home for young women who were trafficked for sex as minors and are now aging out of child protective services. I'll talk with you a little bit more about that in a moment. Learn more and share the information. I've left flyers on the benches for you. I've got more over on a stack. There are lots of great videos. If you want to learn more, read a book. I've got mine out there. And by the way, this is not blatant self-promotion. I do use them, the royalties for, and more, as my husband will tell you, for projects. If there's a particular area you're particularly interested, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, come talk to me afterwards. I'm here. Send me an email. I will help you learn what you want to learn so that you can lend a hand in a way that's really fun and rewarding and fulfilling for you. Finally, lend a hand to New Day. I'll also talk about that. So know the signs. Most of us really would not know if we bumped into, particularly a victim of sex trafficking, right on the streets, because no one's telling. Here are some ways that you can, and it's a guess. I will give you that. But I will tell you, your gut will know. If you see someone who is controlled, never left alone, for instance, you're at a health clinic or an emergency room, someone comes in with a hand that's bleeding, or maybe they're coming into a sex and AIDS clinic, and someone doesn't let them go into an exam room alone. By the way, these are true stories, cases from around here. Someone doesn't let them go into the exam room alone, doesn't want them talking. That's a darn big red flag. Why doesn't that person want them talking? Because they ask for help. Abused. You'll see all sorts of different types of abuse, whether physical, particularly any nurses in here. Scars under the hairline, a tattoo kind of at the back of the neck. Things that you can't see so well. You can't get, thinking from the trafficker's point of view, you may not get as good of a price. Yes, ma'am.
I understand one of the latest things that we're starting to see are barcodes, the barcode tattoo. Are you familiar?
I've never seen that. I have seen internet photos. They're like these stock photos, and they're fake, which why I don't use these things. They're not real barcodes. That's just showing.
They're tattoos.
They're right. They're
not like a real
no. They don't. I've never seen one of those. But what more typically is happening is, and I'll give you the case of a real example from York, Pennsylvania, or I think it was York, Pennsylvania, somewhere in Berks County. There was a man named Paul Sewell, a trafficker who called himself God. And what he did was he branded, what's what we call it when there's a tattoo, he branded each of his victims of sex trafficking with the name of, like he would give her the name of Jewel or Fantasy, or, there were 17 or 18 of them. And he tattooed her with God's Jewel, God's Fantasy, God's Happiness, or whatever. Watch out for those. Those are... I understand, I have not yet had a chance to look into it because I only heard about it on Friday. I understand that there may be some traffickers who are starting to put microchips, like you would a dog, so they can keep track of their movements. Depression, you'd be depressed too. Depression is a big one. Mental health issues. Sometimes, I haven't met too many victims, but some of them do have cognitive differences. So they would drop out of school. Anne-Marie had a third grade reading level, and she just had trouble with math. She was able to bring up the reading, but not the math. They may have difficulties, and that's what makes them vulnerable to traffickers. Whatever makes you vulnerable is what predators will take advantage of. Here's the biggest red flag for me in this particular area, because remember, we're 75% sex trafficking in this area. If you see a teenage girl who has an older boyfriend, okay, I'm here to tell you folks, 14, 16-year-olds do not belong with 28-year-olds. And we all kind of know that as a gut level, but we see it sometimes, and we never even really ask a question. If she is becoming more and more isolated from her family and friend group, and everyone's saying, yeah, well, this pretty much describes, the separation from family. That's what happens in adolescence. But she begins becoming separated from even her friends. This is a huge red flag, especially if she shows up on a Monday morning with a really expensive pocketbook or dress or jacket or a fabulous new pair of shoes. She is being groomed by a trafficker, possibly, until he's going to turn on her. Poor health. Malnutrition, by the way, malnutrition doesn't necessarily, we tend to think of really, really thin people. A lot of the women, the survivors I work with, are really quite heavy because all they had was, they were allowed to eat at McDonald's, perhaps, in between turning tricks, or committing sex acts. They call them dates. In between dates, they may have been allowed to have one meal at McDonald's, whatever they could eat in 5 minutes. So it's major amounts of carbs to try and survive. But it does tend to make them very heavy. Poor health, addiction, whether it's to drugs, alcohol, or whatever. Most likely, they will not identify as a victim. For you, as the nurse, they will not ever say, if you said, who's your pimp? They would be absolutely indignant. It's their boyfriend, their daddy. This is their family now. So you can't ask questions quite directly as that. Again, they won't identify as a victim, so we must help them. Well, what do we do? Okay, if you see any kind of violence, obviously you're going to call 911. By the way, your hospital or wherever you work will probably have mandated reporting that you'll be following. If you have a suspected case, you're really not sure, we have a National Human Trafficking Hotline number that you can call. It's anonymous, confidential, and if you are wrong, no one's going to come back and waggle a finger at you. They're not going to do that. If you're right, you may save a life. Here's that number. Anybody ever had someone say, would you please pull out your cell phones and turn it on during a presentation? Please feel free to turn on your cell phones and put this number in. I've also left stickers, hotline stickers. Do you have one there, John? One of the blue? Okay. There we go. The blue sticker right there. Take one of those home if you're less likely to use your cell phone. This one's easy to remember. It's 888-3737, 888. There was someone in an audience, someone said to me, Carol, you've got the wrong numbers in the middle and at the end. It's okay, it all washes out in the end. But it's easy to remember. Put the 8s on the outside and the 37s on the inside, and you've got it. Again, don't worry if you're wrong. Remember everything you can. What does someone look like? Where are you? Does anyone know the address of where we are right now? Most people don't know where the address of where they are. Oh, this is a good audience. It's helpful to know where you are and just to do a check-in so that you can give the proper information when someone asks. You can also text Be Free. That is 233-733. We're finding now that more and more victims are being found and rescued because of texting. You want to guess why? It is silent. Yep. So you can hand your phone to a victim. If you think something's drastically wrong, hand me your phone. I'm currently working at the moment consulting the Salvation Army's New Day to Stop Trafficking program. And we're doing 3 things to help end human trafficking. One is we have a women's drop-in center. These are for victims currently on the street, I just told you about in Kensington. It is a place where they can go for the basic necessities of life. Some of them don't get a meal in a day, so they come to us and we give them a microwave meal. Some of them living in an abandoned building. Again, taking a shower is something they don't get. So there's one that they can do there. We wash and dry towels, all that kind of good stuff. They can get clothing if they want to. And the day they come to us and said, you know, my boyfriend beats me pretty much every day, and I thought I loved him, and he keeps on saying he loves me, but he doesn't really change even though he says he's going to. She said, you guys gave me a bottle of shampoo, and then you gave me some snacks to keep in my pocket the day that he wouldn't feed me because that was how he was controlling her. There's a day when she says, you guys treat me better than he does. Is there another way I could be out of this? Like, I know I'm addicted to drugs maybe, but could I get detox? I don't even have a driver's license anymore. He took that. There are social workers who work there every day. They do have they text the FBI or police officers, whoever they need, and it's done very, very quietly. But we get those women out. They get themselves out, I should say. They get themselves out when they are ready to make that choice. We also do case management services for teens and victims of labor and sex trafficking. And here is why I am there. We are working to start a local new home for young women ages 18 to 24 who were trafficked for sex as minors and are aging out of Child Protective Services simply because they had their 18th birthday. What do you think, folks? Were you ready to be launched at 18 years old? Raise your hand if you were. I thought I was. And sometimes we are. But if you have had your life interrupted by a trafficker so that you didn't go to high school for 3 years, you lived in an abandoned building, there was no electricity, so you didn't cook any meals, you don't know how to balance a check, in fact, you don't even really know how to manage money, are you ready to be launched? Especially if you are the ones who did not have families behind you. How do they know how to navigate life if there's no family? And that's what we are working toward. Anna's story. This is a compilation. Anna is in our community now. So I try to tell 2 different stories, and this is not her real name. I will always tell you, this is a real photo, not of Anna. Anna had a mom who was an alcoholic. Her dad was out of the picture, so her mom was constantly raging. Her uncle came into the home and sexually abused her. Most of the women I work with have been sexually abused as a child. They almost don't know anything else. Anna left home figuring anything was better than what she was going through at the house. She was sitting on the park bench, proverbial park bench. Guy drives up, man in a car, and he offers her a ride. They're talked a little bit. She got into his car. She began talking to him, telling him her story, and he was a great listener, really a great listener. And he was saying things like, "You shouldn't have been treated like this. I will love you better than what you have been treated." And all of a sudden, she is sold a dream of love and a roof and 3 meals a day and happiness. And here's someone who is going to love her. Within about a week, he had turned on her. He had sold her for sex over and over. It finally took her being rescued by a sweep of a brothel. She was found before she was 18. The difficulty is, with many people like Anna, Anna's fine now. But if there is no place to go after a foster home or a group home because you've aged out of Child Protective Services, you have no place to go. So for people like Anna, and so many like her, we're starting a home. By the way, it's within 15 miles from here. Undisclosed location, but if you want to know how close all of this, we know that we can fill it quick as a wink. We will have girls on a waiting list. That's how many people there are. We have dealt with hundreds and hundreds of women at the drop-in center in Kensington. Most of them are not from Kensington or the city of Philadelphia. Most of them come from somewhere else. One of those places is here. It will offer comprehensive and very holistic trafficking and trauma-informed therapies. We'll also have art groups, friendship groups where they can really begin to take control over their lives. Everything will take their decisions into account. And that even means if they had an addiction, another on Suboxone, something else, most places will not take you. Because in a sense, it's another drug. Our nurse can explain more afterwards how it all works. But there's no place for them to go. And we are working to remedy that situation. I'm going to leave you with a final story. The very first day I volunteered at this drop-in center, a woman, a victim, came in and she asked for a pair of socks. We had everything else, every other article of clothing, we had food, whatever. I could offer her that. But we just happened to be temporarily out of socks that day. One of the other victims who had come in, most likely living in an abandoned building and most likely owning nothing but the clothing she had on her back, bent down, untied her shoes, and offered the socks off her feet. It had not even occurred to me that I could do that, despite the fact that I have a drawer full of socks. And what that taught me in compassion and generosity in that one instance, yet again changed my life almost as much as Mina changed it early on. Choose a solution. There are loads of them. For every one of you out there, there is a God-given talent, and you can apply that toward fighting human trafficking. You don't have to change your life. You can switch to fair trade coffee if you already drink coffee. You can work to protect his eyes. See some thumbs up in the back. There are all sorts of things. Come talk to me afterwards. I will help you. Figure out a way that you might already be doing something that's helping, and you can just leverage it a little bit more. All right, fire drill, folks. You notice that landscapers mowing lawn at a nearby open space don't have water bottles on a hot day, and they don't seem to be taking breaks. Their clothing seems too warm for the season. What do you do? I've already given you a hint. Thank you. All right. Very good. A prize for you. Yeah, call the hotline. Yes, ma'am. Most likely, I'll give you the answer. There was actually a case. Walmart and Target and Kmart were all being cleaned at night by a company that was actually trafficking workers, and that was a case here in Philadelphia, a huge case. They were trafficking workers from Ukraine. No, because Walmart is going to say, well, they're just contracted to us. We don't know anything about them. I mean, you could, but my best guess is they're going to move that one along like a hot potato. Maybe. Yeah, you definitely. What was that?
I say it sounded to me like that would be especially if it was the small landscaping.
Then
In Westchester, you call them and they're like, we'll move these.
they'll move it. Yeah. Yeah. So that number is that you would call.
888.
Yes?
737-888.
Thank you very much. You all passed that with flying colors. The other thing that you can do, as long as you don't see a supervisor near that person, you can actually offer a bottle of water. Yeah, you can offer a bottle of water. Now, this really might be a situation where you just didn't see them taking a break. Are they wearing long sleeves so they don't get sunburned? Or bee stings. Thank you. Don't take that chance. It's a simple call. Know what you saw, where you saw it, how many people were involved, etc. Another true story. While drinking Tuesday morning coffee at McDonald's, you overhear a 16-year-old girl talking to a 40-year-old man. She says she's skipping school. He says not to worry, his colleagues will teach her how to do massages. What do you do? Actually, you can, but what's the first call you make? 911, because she is a juvenile. Anytime you suspect harm with a juvenile involved, that's your first call. And then you can also call the hotline and say, hey, I called this into the local police, but I think you might want to know. And what they may be able to do is, because certainly the hotline may be able to say, well, this should go to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or maybe it's the FBI, or maybe it's local police, whatever the case is. They may make that determination. They may already have a case open, and you have just provided that extra information. And so you say, I have called the police. They will double back, but it's going to go one more time into that register of what's happening. I'll tell you what the lady did, and actually it was very dangerous. I promised the FBI I would always say this: never put yourself in harm's way. Never, ever, ever. They can't afford 2 victims. Let them deal with the one, however many are actually the victims, not you two. She actually took out her cell phone and pretended to take a selfie at McDonald's when she thought that he was not looking. And she got a picture of the girl. He had walked away for a moment. She was so upset she couldn't even think of calling 911, so she drove to the local police station, that's just as good, showed them the picture and said, here's what I overheard. They said, do you mind telling the state police about this? So rather than calling up, she and her cell phone drove to the state police and talked to them there. And then she was so concerned. She had never heard of the human trafficking hotline, but now you guys do. She could have done that too. She went to the only school. There was only one high school in that particular area. She drove to that high school, asked to speak to the principal, and she said, you don't even have to tell me whether this girl is in your school or not, but I want to tell you what happened. I'm so concerned about her. Because she left with that man. Now, she did say, I don't think I can do this, and she walked out, but he trailed her. This woman was so concerned that she told the principal, and he gave her one of those looks and actually said, you know the family, we will help. That's probably a girl who was saved from trafficking and a life of utter misery. You notice that a spa at a nearby shopping center is rarely full during the day, has lots of cars on Friday nights. The blinds are usually closed, and you notice outward-facing security cameras. One day you see 2 women accompanied by 2 men going in, but you don't ever see them come out. All the clients seem to be males. Let me interrupt you here. Not all traffickers are males. They're also women. But most of the purchasers of sex are males. So this is clients. So what do you do? 911, anyone book for the hotline? What's your hotline? So in this case, I'd actually do both again. It's truly a hotline situation because you don't know. You've not witnessed anything really dangerous, but it doesn't feel good with the gut. So I will tell you, I told this story at one particular presentation, and someone called me later on and said, well, I've done it. I called the hotline. I said, how'd it go? She said, nothing happened. She calls me back a month or so later, and she says, well, they closed down a prostitution ring. I told this at the family dinner table at my family, at Eric's family once. I want to say it was Easter dinner or something like that, like sort of inappropriate. But they asked me how work was, in all fairness. They asked how work was. So I told them. And
They won't ever do that.
oh, well, no, wait, you haven't heard that. Thank you. That was their thought. So my niece says, Aunt Carol, I think this is happening in the building where I just started my yoga studio. So I went up, I said, tell me more about it, and everything she was describing sounded like that to me. So went up, I saw, yeah, that really did look exactly like it. So I have her call the hotline, and she called the police. Local police didn't really do anything, but so I said, just keep on pressing the hotline. 2 months later, she's saying, they didn't even listen to me. What was the point? Why did I even bother? I said, give it time. You think that police can just go in and break down a door? They have got to have a warrant, and there's got to be a reason, and that's for the protection of a lot of us. So she calls me 2 weeks later, and she says, Aunt Carol, they really did shut it down. FBI did a raid, and sure enough, it's closed now. And, John, I have been invited back, and I'm allowed to talk to everybody about what I do at dinner. So your gut will tell you. Everyone I talk to says, I would never know this, but people have circled back and said, my gut really did say something was wrong. I called about it, and I have been proven right. Your gut will tell you. Last fire drill. At a family gathering, your 11-year-old nephew playing on the computer asks you to come in. He says, I think I see something bad. He shows you a Facebook page that has a photo of his schoolmate being touched sexually by an adult. What do you do? There's a 911 call. What else do you do? What was that? Thank you. Talk to your nephew, she said. He could be suffering from reflective secondary trauma. So what you need to do is you need to let his caregivers know, parents, grandparents, or whoever he's living with, that he has seen this. And you tell him he did the right thing, bring him into the room. But tell him that he has seen this. And if he is suffering, most counties in Pennsylvania have something like a crime victim center. Here you have Women Against Rape. And they will provide free counseling for someone who is a victim of a crime. And he is also a victim of this crime. It's very disturbing. What do you do about Facebook? Yes, there is. They will take it down. And the police will probably circle around, but they will, with Facebook, but why not go ahead and talk to them? Someone said to me once, I don't know how to do the Facebook. And I said, I'm not sure I know how to either. And someone piped up in the audience and says, don't worry, your 11-year-old nephew will know how to do it. Yeah, they'll know it. So, no, your 11-year-olds also are not allowed on Facebook. Well, we're not allowed to traffic people, on other sites either. But it happens. So you simply have to move along with it, whatever's happening. Folks, this is your time. John, would you mind helping us watch the time? Because I don't have a clock here. You must have questions. Yes, ma'am.
For a second while we
I'm
bring
sorry.
this to you. Just stick it right there.
And I can't come really close to you, which some of you are saying, thank goodness. We don't really want to see you that close up, but to make sure there's not feedback.
Do you actively train nurses and teachers who are right in that, they're in that dynamic with families and people who might be vulnerable every day? They're in the harm's way.
Yes, they are. Two things are currently happening. I have taught nurses, and there is more of a, nurses are now training nurses. I just had a long conversation with Lankenau Hospital nearby, and there is one nurse there who is undertaking this particular project to get them the training they need. Teachers, there's now, have we gotten a budget passed in Pennsylvania yet? Are we still aren't there? So if this budget should ever be passed, one of the things that's part of the fair education, which means that all kids in Pennsylvania get fair and equal education, I'm still hoping, but we can get closer. It provides for every school having a guidance counselor and every school having something called trauma-informed education for teachers. And it teaches teachers how to identify when kids are being victimized at home, whether it is sexual abuse, physical abuse, or they're being trafficked. So we're working on that. It's very difficult to get into school districts by saying, gee, I'd really like to come and talk about sex trafficking to your kids. You can't take away the innocence of young children. But as I said, when kids are starting to have problems in middle school, when they're 13, what do you do with that then? Particularly in high school, where people, they've got to know by then. They've got to know. That's a little bit easier, but you can do things under, for instance, when you're in high school, job readiness skills. Talking about what's appropriate behavior of a boss and what isn't. What can people get you to do and what can't you? And of course, there's always good touch, bad touch. You had a comment, I think.
I was just going to ask, it seems like
I was just going to say that I think maybe the school nurse group is a great group to tap into, and the school nurses and the nurse practitioners. Some of the high schools, the bigger ones, have wellness centers where they'll have a nurse practitioner or somebody.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, that just seems like a good group, school nurses, because they see so many kids and so many things.
Here is our best advocate for kids in schools getting education. And unfortunately, it's not the parents of the kids who are being victims. But parents are the best advocates we have. I was allowed to go talk to all of the principals in the Coatesville area school district one year to educate them. Now, it's fair. It was 2 weeks before school started, and they had more classrooms to set up and hundreds of kids' schedules that they needed to do. And they are required to do all sorts of training. So this is just one more piece of it. But the day a group of parents demands to a principal that their child receives some sort of protection education against traffickers is the day that my colleagues and I will be allowed to walk into the door of a school. Sometimes it happens by a crime victim center who already has good relationships. But sometimes another good way is let the head of the PTA or PTO, parent-teacher organization or association, know this is happening right here in Delaware County. Gee, would you guys like to have a program for the adults? And then parents say, obviously the best thing is have parents educate their children. But if parents are part of the problem, which more often than I'd like to think of, when they're part of the problem, they're not helping. Other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
This has been touched on lightly, but I just want to bring it into focus. In activism, what I always challenge myself to do is, however I'm responding to a problem, think about, am I dealing with this in immediate, medium, and long-term levels? So that while we're dealing with emergencies, while we're dealing with some of the educational issues, to also be aware that if the exploitation preys on the vulnerable, so what makes people vulnerable? And one of the ways to address this problem in the long term is to support struggles for a higher minimum wage, for affordable housing, to defend school budgets from being cut, social services, youth activities, art programs, and so forth, to create an environment within which toxic plants don't grow.
Thank you, sir. I could not have said that better myself. The more, I deal with survivors and to a certain extent prevention, but the truth is when I said that weave this into your daily lives, it's exactly what he just said. When we begin to erase illiteracy and poverty, when we begin acting like we are a true community, we are allowed. Do you guys know what couch surfers are? Couch surfers. Okay, some of you are nodding and some are saying. So a couch surfer is a kid who goes from sofa to sofa to sofa of a friend so that no one will know that he's left home or that he is living in an abandoned building. more, and I'll be honest, couch surfers don't necessarily look like the kid that you want your kid hanging around with. But the sooner we begin to embrace the fact that all of these kids are ours and acting like kind of nosy neighbors, say, where is your parent tonight? Or what's going on? Why do you have an odd cut on your arm? These sorts of things. The more we do this, the more we really will start making a dent in this problem. Thank you so much, sir. There was another question down here. Melissa, I think.
I'm thinking about just reframing and mindset just as much for myself as anything else. So a couple things you talked about, thinking not in terms of someone choosing to be a prostitute, but they are prostituted. And then I heard you say people choosing to get out. And so I guess I'm wondering, that implies those who don't get out are choosing not to get out. And I'm just trying to live into the complexity of my own mind about how that's greater. And same with parents. I'm wondering about parents are part of the problem, but what can we do to support parenting so that they aren't part of the problem, recognizing that they probably are also caught in something that is out of their control. Fair enough?
That is fair, and I will tell you, there's an example that was very sad to me, but I spoke, actually it was in Delaware County, it was not far from here. I spoke to a group of parents and youth about what this looked like, again, how to protect their youth, how to live their lives with their kids. I told them the signs, and one mother and daughter came up to me at the end and said, really kind of shocked. He said, now that you say what this looks like, we think that, they pointed to the 16-year-old, we think that the 16-year-old's good friend is possibly being trafficked. We thought she was just sneaking out at night to go visit her 28-year-old boyfriend, but maybe that's not really the way it was. So I asked them to call the human trafficking hotline, this other family, and there's this secrecy. With teens. They're not going to tell their parents. Don't rat on that girl because she's dating a 28-year-old man. But I arranged for this mother and daughter to have a conversation with a local detective who was really great with teens right here in Delaware County. And the mother said to me, I really feel guilty because, we'll call this the mom Marie. She said, Marie's one of my friends. I really feel bad not telling Marie myself. I said, whatever you do, please don't talk to Marie. Even if Marie is abusing her child in any way, she could be part of the problem. And the friend felt too guilty. What was the first thing she did? She went and she told the mom. The mom said, I just don't want to bring this up to my husband because he's just so upset. She's already run away twice. She's already having difficulty in school. He is just going to leave us if anything else goes wrong. So she refused to hand over the phone records where the guy had been calling her. He had texted her. So how do we help parents be better parents? I'll be honest, if I had a really good answer to that question, I'd be sharing it, I'd be talking about it, and I'd be, I don't know, maybe a rich woman or something, but I'd have a new book out on it. How do we deal with any friends? How do we live with them through their trials and tribulations, and we all have them? I don't have a good answer for that one, and I'm sorry. Does anyone else have a good answer? How would you work with parents who have really lost their way as parents? Teachers here who have some advice for us? Any nurses who have advice on how we have other adults? Yeah, John.
I don't have advice, but I can tell you it is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. I live in Chester, and I hear cases of kids who have been first time adjudicated, and the parents mean well. There's no system that supports parents. There's just none. And if it's not happening there, I don't think it's also happening anywhere. I wish I knew what the answer was. There are some small groups in Chester that are doing wonderful things with parents to try to support them, but it needs so much more than it. I feel like it's part of another one of the systems in our society that's failing, along with education and criminal justice, is the social services to parents.
So here's a challenge. Some of you who might care deeply about this, and John, if he's up for it. What if we as friends or a community began older parenting group? And I don't mean like because we're 60 years old or whatever. I'm talking about, we all get educated, or not all, but many of us got educated. Not enough that when you bring that baby home and you're looking at it, you go, oh, really? Did they let me keep this baby without, with 2 hours of 2 hours? I know how to change a diaper, but the poop is a different color. Is this right? Who teaches us as parents of 13-year-olds? I just got really lucky. There were people in our meeting who actually mentored us through some of the older questions as our kids got a little bit older. We were enormously lucky. Our meeting in fact, they actually had a class one day to talk about how do you go through this. Those of you who belong to meetings, I encourage you to start having gatherings for parents of kids who are, 8 years old, 13 years old. I still might be up for it as a parent of 20-year-olds because we don't know. And if we don't have parents or someone in our lives who's going to say, okay, you might have been able to handle that a little better, how are we going to know what is different than what we saw everybody else in the world doing it, or what we saw our families doing? I love that question.
I think it requires what almost everything requires of us, which is relationship, and building relationships beyond our known circle, because sometimes our known circle can feel kind of insular, and so building beyond what we know to be just in relationship with people so that there are those moments, because you can't be the nosy neighbor and say that's not okay if you don't have a relationship with someone already established. And I just have to make one other point. I'm also a pastor, and so I think I'm not Quaker, obviously, but I think we lose sight if we're not talking about all of this in our churches with our children, if we're not talking about appropriate relationships and power and sexuality and those pieces, that we're missing it. Because my son in kindergarten came home one day and said, my so-and-so friend told me that her father touched her in the wrong way, so we could address that. But they were talking about it as friends, not as, she wasn't reporting it to an adult. And so I think our kids, even in really healthy families and environments, need to know what they might hear something with their friends or in their school, or so I encourage all of us in our community.
Thank you for saying that. 2 comments on what you said. Right now, the faith-based organizations are the greatest link we have to communities. They're willing to learn by far and above more than any other organization. And the other thing that you so aptly said was, it's all about listening, isn't it? So, how many of you would say, Johnny comes home and says, somebody touched him there or her there, and we go, Johnny, you shouldn't say such things. We need to learn to listen wholeheartedly and to believe and to really understand that truths are there in front of us and someone is trying to communicate them. Thank you so much. I think I saw one. Yes, sir. Oh.
You mentioned the phrase, I think it was trauma-informed education or nursing or whatever. I do social justice organizing and community art. Trauma-informed organizing, trauma-informed art. I think that the way in which trauma recycles itself and abuse requires us to actually be trauma-informed neighbors, trauma-informed friends, that the way it can play out in ways that seem inexplicable, but that make sense if you understand some of the basics of how it works, and that information is becoming more and more developed and accessible. Another thing I wanted to say about trauma is that, and this has to do with the question of choice, you know, children, especially girls, making some of these choices. Girls who were abused sexually when they were small, they experience physiologically much higher levels of sexual hormones than other girls, and it comes on several years earlier than other adolescent girls, so that that makes them particularly vulnerable because they're having all of these urges much more intensely, much earlier, without the knowledge, so that on the surface what looks like making a choice is making a choice in a very scrambled, you know, situation where the navigational instruments that a young person have all been messed up. So that almost, I mean, I don't know how to really come up with different language, but even these questions about choice or not choice, I almost prefer sort of nutritious and toxic, or healthy versus unhealthy, right? Or damaging versus restorative.
One of the things that we have to explain over and over again to survivors is, this is not your fault. I don't care if you had raging hormones when you were 12 years old and you came on to a man. You didn't. This is not your fault. Sir, I just want to ask you a question. I love this. Trauma-informed neighbor. What would that look like? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but this is really,
well,
this is good stuff.
The best answer I could give you is, I don't know.
I don't know.
The second best answer is, well, I can give an example, I guess. I mean, I think one of the things that happens with trauma is that we always return to the scene of the crime.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if I was in a traumatic experience, I spend my life trying to go back to that situation. Sometimes I might be the abuser, sometimes the victim, but I keep rehearsing, looking for something better. So the question is, how can we model for people that you don't have to keep practicing the same thing over and over again? And to me, as an organizer, the most powerful instrument I have, you already touched on, really pay attention to people. People are so hungry to be seen that that's remarkably medicinal, and you can build relationship, you can build trust, just with that little piece of magic. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that you have to be prepared, and that's where the knowledge comes in, you have to be prepared for the inexplicable. People who are very reactive emotionally are often given magnesium because it calms the body. But traumatized people, if you give them magnesium, it makes them even more paranoid and explosive. And the reason is that you're on hyper alert. You think everything's dangerous, and so when you get this medicine and it starts calming you down, you start relaxing, all of a sudden the red flag goes up, oh my God, I'm letting down my guard, I'm going to be more vulnerable. You know, and this happens in communities too, when people are working in coalition. People who are used to being betrayed, once you start developing trust, you're getting something, you're building a relationship, all of a sudden they're attacking you out of nowhere. And that can be so hurtful, and if you don't, but if you understand it, if you just even just read or go to seminars or learn some of these patterns, then you can build trust and you can withstand those kinds of, you can get past those things that are thrown at you in order to start building real trust. So that's only a little piece of the answer, but the answer is out there.
It's actually a good day when you talked about they'll test you to see if you're really going to stick around. It's a kind of a good day. It doesn't feel great, but when the survivors I work with, do something that they just know is going to really make you angry. Because you know that we've gotten that far, and all you have to do is turn this corner. Not all you have to do, because there are always new corners to turn. It's a building with 8 sides or something. But yeah, it's always a good day. Something you said has another request from me to you on how you guys can help. And I'll give you a fact first. At the same time, girls are 13 when they are average age of formal entry into prostitution. Boys see their first porn at the average age of 12 years old. And what happens is, he said, constantly returning to the scene of the crime. And I will tell you, pornography does not look just like the old Playboys or Penthouse when some of us were younger. It is violent, horrible, gruesome, brutal violence. So what happens when a 12-year-old boy experiences porn for the first time? There is arousal. But there is also something that he's seeing at the top of this internet screen that says, real men do this. He is also ashamed that he's probably done it without his parents knowing. So now he's feeling a little bit of shame because now he saw something bad. Now he's done something that he shouldn't have done. He's feeling aroused. He is horrified. He feels a little bit betrayed because it says all real men do this, and he's going, my dad does this, and my mom does this. And when I say, when you go onto these sites, I did it truly for research. The FBI was with me. I was so jolted. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You cannot unsee it once it's done. So he's not going to tell anybody that that's what's happened, but he's going to keep returning to pornography for this until he reaches the age of 18 or so years old, and now he has seen it over and over, and now he's trying to get a girl to do some of these really gross, violent things, and she's going, no way. No way. So where is he going to turn to become aroused? Thank you. To a woman who's being prostituted. So now we've hurt her again. How many of you were ever told as a young person, and I'm, explicitly, it's not okay to buy sex? Anyone brave enough to raise their hand? Anyone? A few people, okay. I'll tell you, I talk to college audiences, and most of the time, I average about, this is true, 4% of the audience raises their hand. For a while, I was maybe getting 10%. There's only one group I ever had, and I forgot who it was. They had 50% of the audience raise their hands. Can we dare to say to the world out there, you have got to stop buying sex? Because apparently we do have to say it explicitly. We have got to stop talking about it, because I believe one of the truths about trafficking is until we reduce the demand, we're not going to get rid of this thing. Human trafficking is a $150 billion illegal, I could call it an industry. The profits made on the backs of workers who are not being paid, on slaves, is $150 billion. And if that's hard for you to comprehend, I'm going like, what was $150 billion? I don't usually see that much in my wallet. That is more than Coca-Cola, Starbucks, and Nike make in a year. More than those three big businesses. So we have got to start demanding fairly traded goods, coffee, chocolate, tea, sugar, bananas. I know all of these are available in this county. Cotton clothing that's fair trade cotton. And we have got to start talking about not buying sex. Pornography is indeed linked. Child pornography is a form of human trafficking. That's absolutely got to go. But so does the other. John, how are you doing on time?
That's it.
Okay.
Guys, thank you very much
For
listening.
Please give
for having the
Carol a
conversation.
huge hand. Thank you so much, Carol. And our audience for being so wise and having things to say. If you are interested in learning more from Carol's perspective, we have several copies of her book for sale that Joan can take care of for you. If you have not signed our email newsletter, we send you an email once a month that tells you what's happening at Pendle Hill, our next talks, our next events. Please feel free to do so. There's a pencil and our chart on the front. Thank you again, Carol. Are you going to stay for a little bit longer
will.
if you would like?
Yeah.
Might I
Sometimes people
ask
have
you
private
to go ahead into the back room, into this area, because I'm going to need to get this all ready for worship. So
I can do that.
thank you so much.
Thank you.